Hello, and welcome back to Finance House, your guide to the hidden machinery of the global economy. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most powerful, yet least understood forces in modern history, the Petro-Dollar System. Forget what you think you know about money. We're about to reveal how black gold, oil, became the true currency of power and how a secret deal in the 1970s cemented the US dollar's reign as the world's king. This isn't just a story about economics. It's a saga of wars, secret agreements, and geopolitical chess that has shaped our world for the last 50 years. We'll uncover how the US dollar's dominance is intricately woven with the global oil trade and why this hidden alliance continues to dictate international politics, spark conflicts, and determine the wealth of nations even today. So, buckle up. We're diving deep into the petrodollar empire. To understand the birth of the petrodollar, we have to rewind to the early 1970s, a time of immense global turmoil. The world was still operating under the Bretton Woods system, established after World War II. Under this agreement, the US dollar was pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce, and other major currencies were pegged to the dollar. America essentially promised the world that its dollars were as good as gold. This system provided stability and predictability for international trade and finance. But by the late 1960s, the system was cracking. The United States was spending vast sums of money on the Vietnam War and domestic social programs, printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. Other countries, particularly France, grew nervous. They saw the U.S. essentially exporting its inflation and began demanding gold in exchange for their dollar reserves, as was their right under Bretton Woods. The U.S. gold reserves were draining at an alarming rate. The tipping point came on August 15, 1971. In a move that sent shockwaves across the globe, President Richard Nixon unilaterally announced the suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. This was the Nixon shock. Suddenly, the U.S. dollar, the anchor of the entire global financial system, was no longer backed by a physical asset. It became a pure fiat currency, backed only by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Chaos ensued. Global currency markets were thrown into disarray, and the world faced a crisis of confidence in its reserve currency. The dollar was in free fall, and America's economic dominance was on the brink. Just as the dollar's future looked bleak, another crisis erupted, this time in the Middle East. In October 1973, in response to U.S. support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OAPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, imposed an oil embargo on the United States and other Western nations. The price of oil quadrupled almost overnight. This was a massive economic shock. The world runs on oil, and suddenly the cost of everything, from transportation to manufacturing, skyrocketed. This created what we now call stagflation, a toxic mix of stagnant economic growth and high inflation. For the U.S., it was a double blow. The dollar was weak, and now its economy was being crippled by an energy crisis. Washington needed a brilliant, audacious move to reassert its dominance. And that's exactly what it did. Here's where the story takes a turn, moving from public policy to covert diplomacy. In 1974, U.S. Treasury Secretary William Simon embarked on a secret mission to Saudi Arabia. The official purpose was to discuss economic cooperation. The real purpose was to forge a deal that would change the world. The proposal was simple, yet revolutionary. The United States offered Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer and the de facto leader of OPEC, a deal it couldn't refuse. In exchange for military protection, weapons sales, and a promise to safeguard the Saudi royal family from regional threats, the Saudis would agree to do two things. First, they would price all of their oil exports exclusively in US dollars. Second, they would invest their surplus oil revenues, their billions of petrodollars, back into US government debt securities like treasury bonds. Think about the genius of this arrangement. By convincing the Saudis to sell their oil only in dollars, the US created a massive, artificial, and permanent global demand for its currency. Any country that wanted to buy oil, which was every country, now had to first acquire US dollars. It didn't matter that the dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was now backed by something arguably more valuable in the industrial age: oil. The dollar was reborn as the petrodollar. The second part of the deal was just as crucial. By having the Saudis recycle their oil profits back into U.S. debt, America found a way to finance its growing budget deficits. Essentially, the world was now lending the U.S. money to buy the oil it needed, creating a perpetual loop of demand for both dollars and U.S. debt. Soon, the other OPEC nations followed Saudi Arabia's lead, and the petrodollar system was solidified. The implications of this system were, and are, profound. For the United States, it was a geopolitical masterstroke. It guaranteed the dollar's status as the world's primary reserve currency, giving America what former French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called an exorbitant privilege. The U.S. could print money to pay for imports and run massive trade deficits without facing the same consequences as other nations. It could fund its military and project power across the globe, financed by the very countries that needed its currency to survive. Furthermore, it gave the U.S. immense leverage. Any country that dared to challenge this system or attempt to sell oil in a different currency faced the implicit threat of American economic or even military pressure. We've seen this play out. Leaders like Iraq's Saddam Hussein and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi both publicly discussed selling their oil in euros or other currencies shortly before their countries faced military interventions. While the reasons for these conflicts are complex, their challenge to the petrodollar system cannot be ignored as a contributing factor. For the rest of the world, the petrodollar system created a form of dependency. Developing nations, in particular, were trapped. They had to constantly export goods to earn dollars to buy essential energy, often at the expense of their own domestic development. It created a global financial architecture where wealth flowed from the periphery to the center, to the United States. So where does that leave us today? The petrodollar empire, though perhaps not as absolute as it once was, is still very much alive. The vast majority of global oil sales are still conducted in dollars. However, the cracks are beginning to show. The rise of new economic powers, particularly China and Russia, is creating a multipolar world that is actively seeking alternatives to dollar dominance. China, now the world's largest oil importer, has introduced its own oil futures contract priced in its currency, the yuan, often called the Petro-Yuan. It's been making deals with countries like Russia and Iran to trade oil directly in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar system entirely. Russia has been actively de-dollarizing its economy, reducing its holdings of U.S. debt, and conducting more trade in rubles and other currencies. Moreover, the rise of renewable energy and the global push towards decarbonization pose a long-term existential threat to a system built on fossil fuels. If the world's demand for oil declines, so too will the artificial demand for the dollar that underpins the petrodollar system. The transition to a green economy isn't just an environmental issue. It's a geopolitical one with the power to completely redraw the global financial map. The end of the petrodollar's reign won't happen overnight. The dollar is deeply embedded in the global financial system, and there's no clear single alternative ready to take its place. But the trend is undeniable. We are witnessing a slow-motion shift away from the US-centric world order that has defined the last half-century. The competition between the petrodollar, the Petro-Yuan, and perhaps other digital or regional currencies will be one of the defining geopolitical stories of the 21st century. What began as a secret deal in the Saudi desert built an empire of finance and power, linking the fate of the US dollar to the flow of oil. This petrodollar empire has dictated the terms of global trade, financed American power, and shaped conflicts for 50 years. But as the world changes, so too will the currency of power. The great unraveling may have already begun. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive at Finance House. If you found this explanation insightful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that uncovers the hidden forces shaping our world. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the petrodollar's dominance will last? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious.